It's when you see that we are all being swept up in some kind of conflict. And it's a scary prospect. When the fighting is just between the
I mean, it is scary because at the end of the day, Tim Pool is basically, and has been most of his career, manufacturing a narrative and wants to continue to do so. The problem being with Tim Pool and his reporting is that he uses Andy Ngo as a source all the time. Like, I make those jokes about this human centipede being like it starts with Andy Ngo and then Tim Pool gets it, and then once Tim Pool's made a video on it, then it's okay for Breitbart and OWN and all of them to do it. And then before you know it, it's on prime time with Tucker Carlson, and then it just becomes a story. And then everyone's like, well, I guess, yeah, this was a violent attack by Antifa, right? This is what I'm reading. All right, this story is probably going to need a content warning. There will be discussions of a mass shooting. There will be discussions of Nazi furries, and there will also be praise of the furry community. If you don't already think furries are based, allow me to do that to you in 30 seconds or less.
Surprise, motherfucker. Free TK, free Palestine.
Shout out to Antifa. Respect our troops. Furries do not fuck with Kamala Harris. Bernie, 2020.
Okay, we got that out of the way. I tweeted this a couple days ago. Andy Ngo working in overtime to blame the events in Portland on Antifa, which will inevitably lead to Tim Pool reporting on it as fact, which then OWN and Breitbart can run with it until it's ready for prime time with Tucker Carlson, which is the ass of the pseudo-tipede. Now, I wasn't clairvoyant when I was typing this out. It just seems to be a consistent pattern. And, of course...
Over the weekend in Portland, a far-left activist group was protesting police brutality. It was then reported that a shootout occurred. One of the extremists was killed. Several others were injured. And many of these activists, extremists, whatever you want to call them, started posting that it was far-right extremists, that they were being attacked. The police held a press conference that Antifa immediately came to and started shutting down, chanting, yelling, denouncing white supremacy. The story's actually much worse than the way Antifa framed it. Now, the Antifa types are framing it as though they were attacked by the far right because they're politically motivated. They want people to join their side. The reality is, well, the New York Times and many other outlets are reporting it was an armed homeowner who attacked them. Someone in Portland who knows about Antifa's violence, knows about the threat they pose, warned them, and then a shootout occurred. Antifa was armed. One individual had a rifle, apparently opened fire. There may have been a shootout between the individual and the group, extended over I don't want to say extended period of time. I was going to say that, but it wasn't just like he opened fire on these people. No, they returned fire. And one of these individuals, these Antifa individuals, went to the police and turned in their rifle. But the police also believe that they began tampering with the crime scene, picking up shell casings and trying to obfuscate what really went down. The reason why I say it's much worse that a homeowner got into a shootout with Antifa is not to say that the homeowner was wrong if they were acting in self-defense. I don't know for sure. I can't say an individual lost their life in this, and that's always tragic, and this is exactly why we want to avoid political conflict and potential civil war. The reason I say it's worse, though, to get back to the point, is that it's not political. It's a regular person saying these extremists need to stop. It's a regular person being pulled into the fray. When regular people that don't want to be in politics, that don't care for politics, start getting involved in politics, it's when you see that we are all being swept up in some kind of conflict. And it's a scary prospect. When the fighting is just between the
I mean, it is scary because at the end of the day, Tim Pool is basically, and has been most of his career, manufacturing a narrative and wants to continue to do so. The problem being with Tim Pool and his reporting is that he uses Andy Ngo as a source all the time. Like, I make those jokes about this human centipede being like it starts with Andy Ngo and then Tim Pool gets it, and then once Tim Pool's made a video on it, then it's okay for Breitbart and OWN and all of them to do it. And then before you know it, it's on prime time with Tucker Carlson, and then it just becomes a story. And then everyone's like, well, I guess, yeah, this was a violent attack by Antifa, right? This is what I'm reading.
No, because you've seen it. That these extremists are dangerous murderers. What do? Apparently in this story, the homeowner told them to get the F out, and if they went anywhere near his home, he would shoot them. Well, you got to understand, this is a violent political faction who has engaged in armed conflict before, pulling people from their vehicles and beating them. Yep. Rerouting traffic and controlling streets. and yes, killing people.
Does he read the article at all, or does he just have the headline on? Okay.
The victims, Daja Beck, who turns 39 on Monday, and who was contacted through her attorney, said she was shot twice. One bullet went through her side and the other grazed her knee. Ms. Beck says she was part of a volunteer motorcade group that was working to set up a safety plan to reroute traffic ahead of the march. We're not.
Now, obviously, when there's a shooting and a mass shooting, and I mean, they're so frequent in the United States that, sometimes people seem to downplay them or not be bothered by them. But the details are obviously very important. And if you are someone covering it from the ground, I'm sure everyone's seen those like 24-hour CNN shows where they have reporters standing there. They have to stand there and do filler. And that filler cannot include a lot of speculation outside of what has already been allowed to be stated. Otherwise, if you do a lot of speculation on something like that before you know all the details and they come out, well, I mean, that would be disingenuous to say the very least. Now, that doesn't apply to YouTubers, streamers, stuff like that. I mean, they're just React Andes. They're supposed to just see something and say something, I guess, on the spot, right? Like, oh, well, yes, this has every sign of being what Tim Pool is talking about. It must be true. And then, of course, this started to happen. And said, it's now possible that the shooting happened because a homeowner had been shot upon by Antifa extremists. The narrative by Antifa was that it was a far-right attack and is falling apart, and there's no evidence that has appeared to support it. According to one of Oregon's unnamed police sources, one of the victims' Sunday shooting may have been the homeowner. PPB alleges that this shooting began as a confrontation between armed homeowners and armed protesters. And is spreading misinformation that last night's mass shooter was an innocent victim of an Antifa attack. No's followers are responding by threatening to kill even more innocent people. This was Robert Evans, and again deliberately trying to incite deadly violence. But then this happened. The Portland mass shooter has been identified as Ben Smith, 44, who has a history of violence and has vocally talked about killing Antifa and Black Lives Matter protesters in the past. He became more radicalized over the last 2 years and is a fan of Andy No. Ben Smith is not a homeowner, and the killing was politically motivated. He is part of the furry community, which has a history with alt-right ties. Furries have all across the political spectrum, though. Reports that he sells ghosts, guns, and is a gun fanatic. The Portland mass shooter, Ben Smith, followed Andy No on the tube. Sources say he was a big fan of No. It is unclear if Ben Smith knew about the JFPK march from Andy No. No demonized them as armed extremists that attacked the public. Smith called the victims terrorists before opening fire. Portland police made definitive statements about the Portland mass shooter that weren't important details but make the shooter look less culpable, that he was a homeowner and he didn't have political affiliations. Both of those were wrong. Ben Smith goes by Polybun. He was caught for his attention for his anti-Semitism, Nazi sympathies, and desire for the Proud Boys to do a mass shooting like he ended up carrying out. He was in the Free for All chat and has been called a Nazi con by anti-racist furries. Important note, furries have been working to kick Nazis and right-wing extremists out of their community for years, and this guy does not represent the furry community. We need to acknowledge the alt-right attempts to co-op and force their way into countercultures. No is trying his best to demonize victims, including a 60-year-old woman of the mass shooting, to make the mass shooter look like the victim, uses misinformation straight from the PPB, such as the destruction of evidence, no evidence of this, and police got the video from a protester in Oregon Catholic Press. Police SWAT team executes a search warrant for Ben Smith's apartment. I don't believe other law enforcement agencies are involved. I overheard them talking about the chats that go way back. Smith's Telegram has been active for the last hour, so police may be accessing his phone. Police carry out guns of the mass shooter, Ben Smith. This is not all the guns. I believe there are guns in the bag. There are more recent pictures of the mass shooter. There have been 2 mass shootings by Andy No followers. Andy tweeted a video of a small security group calling them extremists. Within a week, Ben Smith was calling them terrorists and shooting those Andy demonized. Now Andy is sticking up for the shooter. Portland police now ID the mass shooter, who's in serious condition at the hospital, still claiming without evidence that the evidence was removed, zeroing in on a lack of cooperation with the police about the incident. This is extremely common for police, but they're acting like it's unique. I want to address again and formally apologize to the beautiful furry community about my poorly worded tweet yesterday that made it sound as if the Nazi furries are a bigger issue than it is. Furries have been key in exposing right-wing extremists like Ben Smith. Thank you for all that you do. Portland police were notified about Ben Smith previously by people that felt Smith would murder someone. Did the Portland police do anything? Now I want to turn to the furry community to get their statements on it. Just to reiterate for the furry part of the crowd, Portland local furry Polybun Ben Smith was the perpetrator of the mass shooting at a leftist-related march on Saturday night that left 1 dead and 5 people wounded. Rumors started coming around from a round of hours ago, and they are confirmed. He is well known as being alt-right adjacent with ties to hate groups. He was largely ostracized from the furry community and was a well-known problem locally. He was banned from both the Oregon Furry Convention and other events. I've had personal dealings with him in the past, and have seen his violent tendencies on on display. I don't want anyone who personally liked him or wanted anything to do with him. I'm not surprised to find out he did this, and I'm sorry to all the victims in this tragedy. I'm disgusted that independent journalists and furries are the ones breaking this identity news rather than the police. The Portland police still refuse to release any details. Some speculation is that they have his phone and knows that he has hate group tries, so they may be pursuing that. But regardless, the victim at least deserve to know. I will also state in no uncertain terms that the furry community is largely not tolerant of this sort of scum. Bad people exist everywhere, but they are largely not tolerated by the furry community. This is not who we are. A lot of people locally have their own what the fuck horror stories of this guy. He was completely unhinged. Do not believe innocent spin authorities try to put on him. Anyone who knew him knew they expected him to do something like this eventually. This brings us to a bigger problem, and that is that of Andy No and Andy No's actions on Twitter. Now, I've heard the statement before that Andy No provides kill lists to the Atomwaffen and stuff like that. So Andy No, because I was doing research into this, doesn't actually like make a list of people and then hand it over to the Atomwaffen directly. What happens is that Andy No and a lot of the circles he travels in happen to be alt-right adjacent, and people who are violent members of militia groups or the alt-right will look towards Andy No's very frequent posts that he does on, what is going down in Portland, and use that as a way of targeting individuals. Andy No has also been on camera, being on the other side of protests where it is, anti-fascist versus fascist, filming in the group of the either Proud Boys or other right-wing militias before they commit acts of violence. So Andy No is not only, 100% absolved of everything that is happening here, but it gets much worse than you probably think. Chad Loader says, Andy No published a video of my home and advertised that I was unarmed. Then came to my home. They came to my home to hurt me and my son. I'm still in a safe house. The tattoo artist killed in Denver by a No fan. She did my brother's chess piece. Now a No fan murdered another woman in Portland. Racism, transphobia, violence, and death always follow Andy No's tweets. Andy No profits from violence and death. No's followers cheer on mass shootings while Twitter embeds their tip jar feature directly to Andy's Twitter homepage. This is not right. As we speak, followers of Andy No are threatening to mass murder more people. In the replies to this very thread, we need more Kyles to take out the entire crew. Consider this a war. Andy No is linked to 2 deadly mass shootings in the past 2 months. Both shooters openly fantasized about violence with Antifa. They then murdered people. Meanwhile, Twitter's head of policy offered to personally ban Antifa accounts for far-right extremists in a hot mic moment. That's the one when Tim Pool was there as well. A victim of the Andy No-inspired mass shooting speaks out about being shot herself and then holding her friend, 60-year-old June Knightley, as she died. Content warning: this thread is not for the faint of heart. There's a photo of June Knightley. Please rest in peace. Already documented the death threats, stalkers visiting my home, and the actual physical attacks by violent extremists that I've experienced as a direct result of Andy No doxing me on Twitter. My lawyers reported these COS violations directly to Twitter Safety and Twitter Legal. Respectable Lawyer put together a super compilation of all of No's problems. A couple days ago, I posted a very unpopular discussion of Andy No's intentional misinformation regarding a hammer attack incident during the Portland fascist intimidation rally this weekend. We need to talk about the lies from Andy No and why, by this point, anyone who normalizes him as a reputable person should be ridiculed. But there's much more to know about Andy No, as some of his defenders proved. A few people have been debunking Andy No's reporting on this Portland this weekend, but I'm going to deep dive and put it all into one place, and I'm going to cover Andy's lengthy history of bad faith practices, so please get comfortable. Let's start with Portland this weekend and his viral tweet about a poor middle-aged man who was maced and beaten by a mob surrounding them. Andy's video begins with a man already on the ground. Here's what happened immediately before that. And here's some more info on the guy. The fine folks have been calling people the F-slur. Homeboy masking tape on his wrists. 100% redneck was written on his vest and tape. Assured me that they weren't on meth when I inquired about their overactive jaws. This guy with the tape boxing gloves just found his fight and got wrecked. Antifa medics helping him. He's now crumbled to the ground. She's screaming. She's incredibly high. Riot cops arrived. Worth repeating, Antifa medics helped the guy who has boxing gloves on and was calling anyone who walked by the F-slur. And then the guy jumped right back into the mosh pit. There's some more misinformation spread by Andy that Antifa attacked a young girl, but that's not a young girl. The note alt-right goon based Spartan and his adult daughter. They didn't get separated. They spent the whole day agitating people, spoiling for a fight. And sure, Andy corrected this one when he got called out, but there's a small problem inherent to the unreliable people like Andy. Nearly 7,500 retweets of Mr. Andy No's misleading tweet about a man and a young girl scuffed by Antifa. They are in fact known alt-right agitators and instigators, and both of them are adults. Less than 150 retweets of his correction, which he dishonestly softens with the word young. Andy next claimed that Antifa mob attacked when the police weren't around, but as reported by many people, this fight was caused when a Patriot Prayer weirdo rode his bike through protesters. The guy on the bike, Greg Isaacson, is a well-known goon. He was arrested on June 3rd with some fellow Patriot Prayer goons during another violent intimidation rally, notable at the bottom right. Andy's claim about the police not being there to break up the fight is also wrong. I saw this all go down. Police were absolutely in sight. They arrived quickly and broke things up. And then this next bit is thick with irony. Not only did Andy misrepresent the right-wing bike incident, but he later spread misinformation claiming the traffic accident near the protest was caused by Antifa. A bicyclist swerved and fell hard to avoid the Antifa person on the street. He looks seriously injured. An ambulance has arrived. But local TV reporters on the scene said, in case you're in the area of WS Yamhill and Broadway and wondering why the intersection is blocked, a woman on an e-scooter clipped a man on a bike who had the right of way. Then the Portland police, who weren't exactly Antifa-friendly, said the incident wasn't related to the demonstration. Hours later, Andy mentions the Portland police statement, but doesn't mention the incident related to the demonstration. In fact, Andy says a source, read probably a fascist terrorist on meth, told him it was Antifa. Portland released a press statement saying the two had actually collided with the woman on the scooter and were going in the wrong direction. A source tells me that she was part of the Antifa group. She and friends have been passing around the scooter and taking turns trying it out. It's nonstop bullshit stories that keep changing in order to fit what the audience wants. First, it's Antifa standing in the street. Then he misrepresents the police report and changes the story to an Antifa woman driving a scooter. This is InfoWars level garbage. One of the things you'll notice about Andy's propaganda pieces is that they typically don't include the beginning of whatever happened. They start in the middle, or more frequently at the very end, where some fascist goon is looking pitiful. A good example is when the hammer attacker, who Andy misrepresented in the bus incident. Photo of one of the men in the black bus after he was beaten, maced, and had a hammer thrown at his torso during the Antifa attack. And then it was actually someone in the bus that had the hammer originally. Another example of this phenomenon in mainstream media is John Blum. Here's a good chance you saw this photo in national publications during the protests in which No was punched and milkshaked. And far less likely that you saw any of the footage taken of Mr. Blum, a legit fascist militia goon and 3%er, attacking people with a police baton. And of course, none of us will forget the concrete milkshakes, a moronic fantasy concocted by some Proud Boy meatheads and believed to be the dumb Portland cop who had never seen a coconut-based non-dairy milkshake. By then, the unsubstantiated rumor about cement milkshakes was so widely circulated that in fact national news outlets uncritically picked it up and put it in their headlines. Fox News and NBC quietly changed their headlines after initially starting the rumor as a fact. Fewer people know about the shocking incident back in May, when Andy accompanied a fascist thug pals on a field trip to attack the Cider Riot pub, a local leftist hangout. The gang attacked patrons, spraying mace into the patio of the bar. The owner of the bar has filed a lawsuit against the Patriot Prayer members, noting that the patrons were struck with bricks and hurled into the patio. The patrons poured outside of the bar to confront the attackers, and Patriot Prayer weirdo Ian Kramer was arrested after he broke a woman's neck with a baton. While she was in the hospital, Andy No published her name. There was also an apparent video of Andy filming and pointing out the same women prior to the attack. I haven't seen the footage, but multiple people have told me it was posted by this account, and there were other tweets discussing the video. About a month later, when a couple of irate protesters punched Andy for his role in the Cider Riot incident, a long history of antagonizing Portland leftists and assisting fascist thugs, Andy became a cause célèbre, not just amongst the right, but amongst mainstream journalists. These obvious journalists took Andy's sweeping little eyes and never thought to question that there was really what he was representing himself a good point.
Consistently the most anti-fash community since the early years.
Thanks, Lettuce Atome, for the tier 1. Appreciate that. And yes, furries are based. It is also important to note Andy's unreliability extends beyond Antifa. He's just a terrible reporter in general, poisoned by his own biases. For example, Andy often cites the byline of the Wall Street Journal. It was a piece about East End neighborhoods in London, which he portrayed as utterly alien due to Muslim domination, mentioning signs reading alcohol restricted zone. But in truth, this has nothing to do with Muslims. In the UK, an alcohol restricted zone is a place in the UK where you can drink on the street, and is typically found where there are a lot of bars, strip clubs, etc. So not only does the alcohol zone have nothing to do with Muslims, but the area Andy implies is a Sharia bubble is actually a popular nightlife district. In fact, there's a bar right where Andy was standing. It's also important to remember that Andy was terminated from the PSU Vanguard for a dangerous breach of journalistic ethics. He outrageously misquoted a Muslim student to make him appear to support jihadi violence. It was an ugly, shocking episode. Some may also remember that Andy and his fellow Kit editors published a ridiculous study of self-professed extremist researcher named Ewan Lenahan, who claimed that Twitter analysis was used to determine which journalists have secret Antifa collaborators. He was outed long before the hardcore right-wing troll and moderator of the racist Groyper group chat, Google it, named ProgDad, and used methodology to connect the journalist to Antifa, and it was ludicrously dumb. And this troll study was used by Linehan, has resulted in Nazi terrorist group Adam Waffen publishing a kill list to those specific journalists. So there's where it comes from. Interesting side note, Linehan once spent Christmas making a YouTube video standing under a bridge with a frog butt taped to a wall because he was mad that I made fun of Groypers. Earlier this month, Andy's little rag provided that it was a no fact-checking and welcomed anything to play into its biases when a Chapo fan got them to publish a fake Archie the Construction Worker piece attacking the DSA with alleged insider info. There's so much more I could talk about, but it's all become repetitive at some point. Remember the mass shooting in El Paso? Shortly before it happened, No was publishing bullshit stories about Antifa and would attempt a 10-day siege. That's what he does. Anyone who's actually paying attention will see that No has become disturbingly cozy with the most hardcore fascist terrorists in America, and that he purposely engineers his work as deceptive PR for these groups. Do I think No is a hardcore fascist? No, not really. I think in reality that he just hates left-wing people. I think something happened in his life that made him bitter about the left-wing people, and it went from there. I mean, that one's a little bit of the armchair side of this. Much like MAGA people yearn to own the libs, and he yearns to own the leftists, and he's more than happy to make strange bedfellows with meth head terrorists to do so, especially now that it's become so lucrative. No matter how many times he is debunked, he'll continue to make up a story designed to hide something truly ugly. It was a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signaling nothing, yet it is a tale that mainstream media swallows again and again and again. So if you end up hearing about a hardcore fascist militia committing a hammer attack from inside of the nightly news, and I think the real question here isn't about Andy No or the terrorists. It's how we get to a place where there are busloads of legit hardcore fascist white supremacist militias that could invade a town after they hold intimidation rallies, and why the institution legacy media is getting behind the bullshit PR sideshow that attempts to portray them as victims. Because we can and should collectively dismantle Andy No's illusion of credibility, and let's be real, they'll just find another huckster. They're a dime a dozen. The problem here is more sinister. I don't have answers yet. I'm working on it. Shocking update to the Andy No saga. Amazing new footage emerges from a lawsuit showing Andy No laughing at Patriot Prayer members as they plan to attack patrons of a local bar. Andy No update. Kiet cut ties with them, scrubbed their media website after Andy's embarrassing week came close with a new video of him hanging out with fashionist goons, planning the attack. Lenman says it's unrelated. But again, anyone who is using Andy No as a source at this point should be called out. Because, like, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's like people who still are getting caught occasionally. Well, it's not as bad anymore, but when Project Veritas was suddenly being retweeted by people like Tulsi Gabbard and other people, and a handful of them did delete it eventually, but it took a lot of people being like, whoa, hold down, do you know what Project Veritas does? Like, it's a very dangerous thing for a Glenn Greenwald to equate Project Veritas with journalism, because it adds a lot of credibility to the tactics that they or Andy No use, which I would argue is trying to create or falsify stories in the first place. I did a little investigation into Andy No. Figured I could probably share it here.
Install a profanity filter. I kid you not.
But now there's an even quicker way to compile kill lists for the Adam Waffen. Introducing the No expansion pack at no extra cost. Now you can provide direct information and doxing to the Proud Boys under the banner of journalism.
As any good journalist knows, the most important stories are often those not being told.
5 minutes later.
Antifa has mastered the art of making its violence appear innocuous. For example, projectiles that look like water balloons can be filled with chemicals. Small slingshots can be used to project rocks, glass, and ball bearings into police lines. Umbrella tips can be fastened with discreet pocket knives.
Penguin to the rescue! You foul filcher of fire! I'll teach you to...
To get the best stories possible, be sure to instigate as many confrontations as you can. And then, whenever anyone retaliates, milk that gravy train all the way to Twitter Town. Go on a press circuit to describe how you have permanent brain damage.
The mob that attacked me with weapons used gloves that had fiberglass material on the knuckles. So these weren't just bare-handed fists going to my head and my face. They were harder. They were weapons with the aid of these gloves.
It's horrible. You know, these are people who are chanting "no hate, no fear," which is just an incongruous idea.
But be sure to apply the brakes when you tweet things people will know to be a little sus. Then fundraise hundreds of thousands of dollars forever. Literally forever. Like, even to the point where years later you mail out ransom letters to old folks' homes, hoping to funnel their children's inheritance right into your pockets.
All those milkshakes and other unknown liquids that were hurled at my face. And I know milkshakes can sound kind of cute as a protest, but really when they're thrown at force in your face, it's a viscous liquid. You can't see where to go.
Received significant injuries from that?
Yes, a brain bleed.
And never stop tweeting out a fury of stories, many of which are falsified in real time by barely any fact-checking, and enjoy a double KO of being the fourth most highest used source by the big beanie himself.
If Joe Biden wins, they'll take over all our cultural institutions, they'll put psychotic and insane definitions in our dictionary, and they will take over, and regular Americans will say, please, for the love of God, just leave me alone. And they never will. They'll never stop coming. They will take your job away. They will come for your parents.
Or even by Ian Miles Shaw.
They'll come for your parents. It's only a matter of time, you know?
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we beseech thee to smite down our enemies. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble court jesters, here to amuse you. To our lords, Trevor R., we give thanks for this spit of land for us to eke out this meager existence. To our knights, Merid, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Ellie Leslie, Alex P., Brandon, Words Greenwood, Nate, that one guy, Hagbird Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multi Mondi, Trevor Yanis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Cern 42, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Nkosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our flag in a veil, and we salute you, our friends.